Sure.
Welcome everyone to our June Lunch and Learn. My name is Sarah Hedke. I'm the Director of Communications at Wisconsin Farm Bureau, and we're very excited to have you with us for this month's webinar. So this month we're going to be talking about local affairs, and Steve Boe is our Director of Local Affairs, and he's going to talk a little bit about what he does in that role and how he can assist County Farm Bureau members. And then he will turn it over to one of our County Farm Bureau members that he's worked pretty closely with in the past, Leslie, and she'll give you a little rundown of what she's done. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Steve.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. Again, my name is Steve Boe. I'm the Director of Local Affairs for the Wisconsin Farm Bureau. And first off today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what local affairs is and what my job entails. So my job is to work at the most grassroots level on issues that are affecting our county farm bureaus. And not only the issues that are affecting them, but also to be proactive in creating those relationships within counties. So some of the cool things that were happening and seeing throughout the state is like what's happening in Iowa County with their 4R event. 4R stands for the right rate, right source, right place, right time. So in August, we're going to be inviting a lot of town and county officials along with state and federal officials out to the farm to talk about nutrient management and what farmers are doing to be good stewards of the land. We've also had other issues throughout the state, like what's happening in District 8, where county farm bureaus are coming together to create a packet of information for local law enforcement on what to do with animals when they come across them, particularly with livestock. So my job as the Director of Local Affairs is to work with county farm bureaus once they want to tackle an issue, and also to provide the resources for them for when they want to create and establish a better relationship. I work with county farm bureaus if they want to, say, invite the county sheriff in and have a meeting to talk about safety issues within the county. I've also mediated some meetings with other county officials like land conservation, even county farm bureaus working with their county fair. So my job is at the grassroots level, at the most basic structure, in working with county farm bureaus to be able to have a stronger relationship with the partners within that county. Because one of the things that we forget in the grand scheme of things is that we always think that Madison is where rules and regulations are at, but there's a lot of things that happen at the local level that we need county farm bureaus to be aware of. And so that's my main job, and I travel the state quite often throughout the week, 3 to 4 days a week. And one of the great activities that I have been able to be a part of is something that happened up in District 9 in, say, Croix County. And we are so glad to have Leslie Svacina with us today to talk about one of the great events that they had hosted. And Leslie, I would like to invite you to kind of talk about what you guys did in District 9.
All right, thanks, Steve. And I just want to, before I get started, I just want to give a little quick forewarning that I shared with fellow presenters. My cat is old, but she decided to wake up before we started doing this. So if you hear a meow, just ignore it. I will too. But thanks, Steve. My name is Leslie Svacina, and I'm in St. Croix County. And if you're not familiar with where that's at, we're in northwestern Wisconsin. We're a county that just borders the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. And we decided to do some proactive measures and outreach with our local policymakers last summer. And I'm going to do, as I jump into my presentation, I'm going to screen share with you. So just give me a second while I pull this up. All right. All right. Let me open. Okay, so in terms of share, okay, so as we looked at holding an event, we really went with the idea that our local affairs events, our local affairs outreach with our policymakers really is around the idea that it's easier to build relationships and trust before big issues happen. In our area, we've been pretty fortunate to have good relationships over time with our elected officials and our decision makers in our area. But one thing that we've started to recognize is that, looking at other trends across the state, is that there is some more movement on, as Steve talked about, folks being more engaged in what's happening locally with agriculture. And we recognize in our area that while we've had good relationships with our local folks, elected officials, that it's really important for us to continue to maintain those relationships. And the key is, like, it's easier to hold an event like the farm tour I'm talking about when there's no extra pressure on making sure something happens if there's a big issue out there. And so that's kind of the premise of a local affairs event. And I'm going to, let's see. Okay. So as I talk through our event that we did last summer, I'm going to just kind of give you a high level of what we did, and then kind of detail out some of the key findings if you were to replicate something like this. So we held a policymaker agriculture tour last summer, and our purpose really was focused on twofold: showcasing the diversity of agriculture in our county. We're a pretty dairy heavy area, but we do have a lot of other types of agriculture. And so we wanted to show our elected officials the diversity, and also including we toured a dairy farm that is also a fairly large farm with multi-generations. That's a CAFO, beef cattle operation, and then also an organic fruit and vegetable farm. And in addition to showing and having opportunities for questions to learn about agriculture practices today, we also touched on how local, state, and federal policies impact our farming businesses in our county. And the other interesting dynamic with our county is that we are located, because we're so located close to the metro area, we have our population is really growing fast, and our county is predominantly very, I would say, urban or more suburban in the western part of the county, as folks that work in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And then the eastern side of the county, like where I live, tends to be more rural, but we're seeing more folks moving out to our area that maybe haven't had a rural background or farming background. And it's important that we recognize that we give an opportunity for those folks in our area that are making decisions to continue to know who we are, or our organization and farmers in our area. So that's kind of the premise of it. But I could see this also holding true for a lot of other counties too, even if you're don't have as major metro influence like we do. Just for the sheer fact is we have a lot of elected officials who have fewer rural and agriculture ties. So there's still a lot of value that way. I'll touch on who we invited in just a moment. Okay, and then our schedule. We wanted to keep our tour to a half day at the most, recognizing we didn't want to take up too much time of folks, but we also really wanted to focus on touring the 3 different farms versus one farm. And we, if you can see the different farms that we had here, and we wrapped up, while our main focus was the tours, we wrapped up with a mini reception afterwards at the farm that we started. We're fortunate that one of our host farms, White Pine Berry Farm, does a lot of UPIC and also on-farm events. So they had the space where we could have folks park and get on a bus, and then also a space where we could host a mini reception. So in terms of who we invited 50 plus invitees, and we focused on anybody who represents St. Croix County who's an elected official. So in some instances, there are folks who might even represent just a small portion of our county, and we invited them. The idea is, let's invite everybody who represents us, and then they can decide if they can make it or not. We also recognize a lot of local folks who are elected officials, especially at the town level and even county level, hold full-time jobs in addition to their elected positions. So we wanted to give them an opportunity to come, but also recognize that not everybody might make it. And we included local officials to state representatives, and also our congressional representatives as well. And given the timing of when we held the event, we also invited candidates from the major parties who are coming for upcoming elections last fall. I would say in the future, we'd also include village and city chairs. We were in presidents and possibly Chamber of Commerce leadership. We were really focused on folks who represent our rural areas. But thinking back, as we held our event, I think there would be some value in having those other folks there, just from the sheer fact of we all contribute to the economy. They just might, having them be aware and network with some of our local farmers is a great I think would still have a lot of benefit from a policy standpoint. Everybody was invited by email. You might think formal invites would be the way to go with something like this, but we really found that the email really gave us an opportunity to get responses right away, and then also be able to do follow-up and reminders once we got closer to the event. The only group that we did mail invite was some of our town chairs, just because it really varied by township of who we could actually get a hold of emails for. And so those were mailed out in advance. In terms of other folks, we were very we were intentional about who we invited beyond that. So our ag community, we stuck with our planning committee, our county farm bureau president, and also the tour host families. And we also didn't invite media, but we followed up with them afterwards. And part of those last 2 points are really on the idea of we really wanted to create an open environment for folks who are in those positions to ask questions and not feel like they're on, even though they're on because we're constituents, but more of an open environment that there's no question is a bad question, opportunity to learn and discuss and of what's going on our farms, just in terms of practices, but also those issues that are impacting how we do our business. In terms of our planning timeline and budget, so we met a few times over the course of the summer for our event, and we met in June. Most of our discussion was looking at who was going to be our tour sites, and really it focused on where in our county, geographically and logistically, can we tour 3 farms so we're not spending all of our time or all day on the bus going to the different sites. And then we also took into consideration, because this is our first time in particular, obviously Farm Bureau members, but then also the farms themselves, are they set up for tours? So in terms of overall presentation, are the families, are they comfortable with having guests like this on the farm? Have they had tours before? It wasn't necessarily a requirement to have tours before, but sometimes folks who've had tours on their farm are a little more comfortable and have a better understanding of how to host groups. But that doesn't mean that that's not a feasibility. And then we split up responsibilities for our committee work. July, we met to finalize our tour sites and work on our invite list and also discuss transportation. And our transportation was our biggest budget item. And I'm guessing some of you might have questions about that. And so we decided to go with a coach bus instead of a school bus. And it's a little bit more expensive, but really the benefits of that is that it's August, probably one of our hottest times of the year in Wisconsin. So we want people to be comfortable. Also knowing that we were on a tight schedule, we wanted to utilize the bus to continue the conversation and our tours in between farm sites. And also we recognize if we're inviting folks out who haven't maybe been on a farm before, or it's been a while, or recognizing that elected officials might be sitting nearby, maybe some of their opponents, all friendly, of course. We wanted people to be comfortable in this environment. And so that was part of that process. And so that was a big piece of our budget. And if you have one idea, in our area, I think it was about $500 that we spent on that. We didn't pursue any sponsorships this year, but I think there's always opportunities if you're planning ahead to look at how you could cover those costs. And we had a little bit of money in our budget for our mini reception after, but a lot of that food we had donated. We met in early August to finalize the tour sites itself. So each tour, we had each farm identify egg issues or areas of concern with policy that relate to their farm. And then because this is a policy related tour, and then we prepared handouts, news releases, figured out who on our committee was going to take photos, and then worked on our mini reception prep. We had the tour in August, and then afterwards we followed up with thank yous, and then also did our media outreach as well afterwards. In terms of results, so if you remember back when I had shared our invite list, we had about 50 plus invitees, and if I recall, we probably had around 18 to 20 RSVPs that confirmed that they were going to attend or have representatives that were going to come. Some staffers from different offices had talked about that. The day of the event, it was raining, and we had emails, so we were continuing. We did reminders and talked about how we had rain plans, planned accordingly. And it actually didn't rain when we did the tour, which worked out well. And of course, things come up, so our numbers were a little bit lower. We were around a dozen folks that came, and what was interesting is, even though it'd been great to have more folks there, really the most important part is that I think sometimes with smaller groups, you have opportunity to have more quality questions, discussions, and conversations. And if you have a larger group, sometimes that doesn't happen, or you might not have folks feel comfortable asking those questions because they might be thinking about, well, what is somebody else going to think about what I'm asking? Will I look like I don't know what I'm talking about, or I should know this already? And so we came away with a lot of great interaction with all the folks that attended the tour, a lot of great questions and discussion. And afterwards we've had follow up with most of the attendees. They've actually been in touch with us as our committee or other farms that were on the farm tour on either revisiting some of the issues we talked about, or visiting back or reconvening with them on other items that may come up with the work that they're doing as an elected official. And in general too, if you think about when you work with, let's say, new folks, whether it's, let's say, a salesperson or a vendor, whether it's in your job or on your farm, if you meet somebody once, you might not think about working with them again, or value that relationship. But the more that you can have a touch point with, in this case, elected officials, that they remember you and may come back to you and talk with you, the better. And that goes the same with the candidates as well. We had, there was one candidate that had attended. She wasn't elected, but I was really impressed with, she was taking notes, asking lots of questions, and had a lot of great engagement. And I think about, if she were elected, we would have had a great advocate for agriculture, or somebody who's willing to have us at the table and talk about issues or topics that come up. And that's true with any of those folks that were there, but that's just an example on the candidate side of things. So in terms of tour prep, when I was doing some research on doing this event, I talked to a few folks in other county farm bureaus that have done similar types of farm tours, maybe not quite exactly what we did. And really the message was the best advice I got was be intentional about the tour sites and your hosts, and the ag community participation. And I talked a lot about these, but it can be really easy about, on the ag community participation, can be easy to want to invite a lot of folks to be a part of it, because you want to have your community be all involved. But I think it's also important to not, you don't want to have too many extra folks to either take over the event or kind of maybe unintentionally shift the direction of what the purpose of the event is. So that's one, some pretty good advice I had received, or that we had received in our planning committee. Also, in terms of planning the tour site activity, this is where most of the focus should be on. And really, it's looking at set the tour route within the farm, and the conversations for each site. So we gave some general suggestions to each farm about things to, excuse me, I'm just moving okay, there we go. On things to cover. Some of our sites have actually all of our sites have had tours before. Some gave more tours than others, but we had gave some ideas of what to take into consideration for having this type of group. And then we also offered the option to do a walkthrough beforehand with those tour sites, just to talk about, okay, so what are we going to do? What are we going to talk about here and here? And what, if it's raining, what does it look like on your farm now versus what it will be when we have the tour? And so we did do that with one of our sites, and it worked well just to get that know how it's going to look when we get there, because it's easy for us to think about, oh yeah, I can give a tour on our farm, but walking through was very helpful. In addition, each tour, as I'd mentioned before, identified 1 to 2 policy concerns or an ag issue to emphasize on the tour and share with the committee. And those really could range from local issues to state or federal issues. And then in order to prepare for that, we also provided our farm tour hosts and committee with issue backgrounders to prepare and review in advance. And don't let this last one really intimidate you. It's most of that information I had was able to get from Steve's team with the government affairs team from Farm Bureau. And so that just helped the farms identify what issues, if they needed a little assistance on what issues might be impacting them, and also have some more details on the nuts and bolts of it. There was a few things locally that we had been going on that I tweaked a little bit for us, but in most cases, there's materials that even relate to local issues as well. And then a few other tips. One piece that I had taken away from another training in terms of working with elected officials is elected officials, especially when you have them out on a farm or you're visiting with them, they really like to have some type of material that they can either take back to their office, share with their staff, or if they're staffers, share with the elected official they work for. And so we prepared a handout that had a brief summary, a one-pager of the tour sites, the issues and concerns for each farm, and then also contact information for the farms and committee. And so that was something that they could take back. We also, when we did follow-up with all of the invitees, we included this document as well, because we had some folks who couldn't make it for certain reasons, but were still in communication with us, so it was a nice way to have that touch point. And then my last tip is really, don't overcomplicate the event if you were going to plan this. And it can be easy to want to take it one step further, just because, it's the nature, I think, of being in agriculture in the rural community. We want to be hospitable and showcase what we're doing on our farms. And in this case, I think, especially with our committee, it was easy for us to want to, let's, ramp up the reception. But we, as we were discussing and planning, but we stepped back and said, okay, we're going to keep the reception simple just so we have a discussion afterwards and time for people to gather and do any follow-up. But we really put our emphasis on the tour, and I'm glad we did that. And I think it'll continue to be like that in the future. And it also takes less pressure off planning as if you really focus on the tour itself, because that's really the objective of having the opportunity to learn and interact and so forth in that capacity with your guests. The mini reception, I think we may utilize more in the future if we do this again, just from the fact of if we're looking at sponsorships and things like that, it might be a way to have a touch point for those folks to be involved, but maybe not in the whole event itself. And I just want to say thank you for attending this Lunch and Learn, and for Farm Bureau for asking me to be a part of this. And of course, I want to give a thank you to our committee members that worked with me on this project and the farms that hosted the tours for us. And then if any of you are looking at planning a similar type of event like this, I'd be more than happy to share some of our planning materials, some of the materials I shared with our farms, so that way you have some resources to execute some type of an event like this in your area. So I'm going to stop my screen share here, and I will turn it back over. If we have time for questions, I'll let Sarah kind of decide how to facilitate that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve and Leslie, for sharing a little bit more. If anybody does have questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself or type them in the chat. If you're not sure how to do that, if you look along the lower portion of your screen in that gray toolbar, you'll see a little chat bubble toward the middle. And on the left-hand side, there's a microphone. And so if you click on that, you should be able to unmute yourself and ask any questions that you have. While we're waiting for folks who may have questions, Leslie shared her contact information at the end of her presentation. But if you're looking to get in touch with Steve Boe, you can go to our website, WFBF.com. And if you go to the policy section, we have a local affairs page and an online form you can fill out to get in touch with him so that he knows what you're looking for more information on or what you're looking for him to help you with. And so that's the best way to get a hold of both of our presenters. So I'll just give a couple seconds. If anybody has questions, feel free to chime in and ask those. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions now, but feel free to follow up with our presenters afterwards. And thank you so much for joining us.